This is a recording for Chapter 4 from the second edition of our textbook, Expand Opportunities for Children to Use Their Active Bodies. In the introduction of the textbook, it talks about factors that reduce opportunities for children to be physically active. A focus on school readiness has increased the amounts of time that children are expected to sit and listen rather than being physically active. Environmental rating scales, which require additional learning centers in our classroom designated, for example, for math, science, and literacy. Heightened attention to safety and risk avoidance, not allowing the children to explore and discover. Indoor environments with limited space for movement. Outdoor play, which is often less than 30 minutes per day. Swings and slides are being removed from playgrounds because of safety concerns like having enough clearance area for children to swing without passersby being injured. All of these factors, though, are limiting children's ability to participate in active physical play. Active physical play is an integral part of the sensory motor system. It builds our neural pathways that are crucial for eyes and attention, and it helps children regulate emotions and burn off energy, and it develops children's abilities to plan and carry out actions. So we all know about the 5 traditional senses, which, by the way, are crucial, and that's visual or sight, auditory or sound and hearing, tactile or haptic, touch, gustatory, which is taste, olfactory, which is smell. But there are really 2 more that are really important by themselves, but also integrated with the information from the other senses. There's proprioceptive, which provides feedback that tells children how their body is moving and where they are in space. Sometimes we call that spatial relations. And then vestibular, which is located in the inner ear. And this sense helps us negotiate gravity in order to spin, twist, run, and swing. It helps us coordinate the information we get from our other senses. And if there are problems with the vestibular sense, this causes tripping, falling, and running into things. And so keeping in mind then these 7 senses rather than 5, processing sensory information is truly the foundation of all learning. So the first principle in regards to this information is recognizing children continually seek proprioceptive and vestibular movement and how this affects all the aspects of their daily experiences. So children are really developing a deep understanding of their sensory systems and how these integrate to the traditional recognized systems, and this actually helps us gain a new perspective of children's learning opportunities. If we recognize how children seek these opportunities, it helps us understand their constant movement and their preferences to stand and why they struggle to sit still. These senses require children to move to receive the whole story of their environment. And remember, they need to have the whole story in order to grow cognitively and to be able to think at informal operations as they mature and develop. Proprioceptive and vestibular movement allows them to organize and calm input to the brain. Principle 2, we want to observe children involved in active play to better understand and support them. So we want to make sure that we take advantage of the time when children are being very active to focus on their development and how we can facilitate and support that development. So observing individual children engaged in active play can tell us about their knowledge, skills, interests, and developing abilities. This focus can help us create documentation for tracking development and assessment, along with making person connections with children through learning stories. Learning stories are written in the voice of someone who cares deeply, is observing and listening closely to discover what is happening. The focus of a learning story is on the child's strengths, and stories include what happened, what does that mean, and opportunities and possibilities in regards to that information. If you read Learning About Evelyn on page 108 of the second edition, this gives you a perfect example of a learning story. We can also focus on a group of children and the way they face challenges and persevere by reading the story on page 110. Principle 3, designate a space in your indoor environment to invite children to spread out and move. And this principle is implanted into a variety of creative ways in your textbook. If you read the story Using Borrowed and Garage Sale Items on page 112, creating a trapeze area on page 113, which is particularly interesting. On page 114, there's big hollow blocks and floor planks, which tend to be a bit more traditional materials. Large exercise balls that you see pictured here, and that story is on page 116. And then using platforms and tires on page 117. This really gives us some great ideas on how we can be creative in order to allow the children to be creative. Principle 4, notice children's competence as they take on physical challenges and risks to allow and support their efforts. When we avoid things that are physically challenging for the children, the role of the teacher is diminished, especially if this is a program rule or prescribed way of doing things, then that limits what teachers are able to do with their individual groups of children. The outcome could be teachers taking a less active role in thinking through safety issues while supporting the children's learning. So if you can observe your children and what their physical capabilities are, if you have the freedom to adjust your safety rules, it can be much more effective in supporting the children's learning. If there is a risky activity, offer children other alternatives that keep them safe while allowing them to challenge themselves. Explore examples of this process by reading Building a Culture of Wrestling on page 118 and Getting a Monkey Bar License on page 120. And one of the interesting aspects of these two stories is that the children are developing rules themselves and then adjusting those as they go along. Principle 5, create guidelines with children to help them take on challenges and risks. So active play and movement helps children calm down and participate more fully in what's going on in the learning process in the classroom. Allow children to spread out, lay down, rock back and forth, and this helps them stay engaged rather than having them sit completely still. Take a look at how a Montessori work mat as a base can assist this process, providing freedom in limits. And so read Focused on the Mat on page 122. Waiting can also be challenging for young children, and Jonah has many movement strategies he uses to help him wait to go outside and read his learning story, Jonah and His Body, on page 124. Principle 6. Understand how children are more able to negotiate cooperative play when it involves movement. And as we've seen in some of the stories in this chapter, children are actually better able to cooperate when they're moving together. Teachers tend to think it is the opposite and try to prevent discord in movement activity. And this is why it's so important for teachers to be good observers so they can see the capabilities of the children in their classroom. Reed listened to Matthew, focused on the game Duck, Duck, Goose. What was his first reaction and then his final conclusion when it came to the children playing that game? And read Sabine's hot lava game story using wiggle pads and sensory seesaws. How were the children experiencing vestibular stimulation? And so lastly, principle 7, provide loose parts and open-ended play equipment so children can find new ways to challenge themselves. So children bring their flexible thinking, problem solving, and eagerness to grow and learning to their active body play. They create more and more challenging physical activities for themselves in this process. When programs have open-ended equipment and loose parts, creativity is sparked even more. Read Sliding Sensations on page 129 and Moving Inventions on page 130. How are open-ended equipment and loose parts utilized in these stories?